I think this was a major mistake by the Israeli regime because bombing another capital unprovoked and the image, bombing the Ministry of Defense and people saw it happen live. It just shows the world that the Israeli regime is this outlaw and rogue regime that it is. It further reinforces that. I don't think this is good for the regime. And it shows that countries like Turkey, who've never done anything to hurt Israel, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which have never hurt Israel and have always been friendly to the Israelis, that they are never going to be treated any differently than the real resistance.
What you're laying out here is the strategic backfire of an unrestrained strike. It doesn't intimidate. It groups everyone, neutral, opportunistic, or opposed, into one psychological camp that feels equally vulnerable. History shows that when a state's actions erase the distinction between active adversaries and fence-sitters, it accelerates alignment against itself. We saw shades of this with coalition dynamics in the 2000s. That reputational cost is hard to unwind once cemented.
The Israeli regime doesn't, and of course the forces that support it in the West, they're never going to allow anyone to have any sense of security in this region if it does not conform entirely with Israeli regime interests. So no matter what, Turkey under Erdogan has really done huge favors for Netanyahu. Because, for example, if Turkey had broken off ties with the Israeli regime, that would have made it, that would have helped create an incentive for others, or strengthen the will of others to also boycott the Israelis, or to cut off ties, or to decrease ties. But when Turkey is doing business as usual, exporting goods, exporting fuel, how can one expect African countries or Latin American countries or Asian countries to take any action against the regime? When the Emirates is doing business as usual. These countries have played a huge role in strengthening Netanyahu's hand during the last 21 months.
Leverage accumulates quietly. When logistics, trade flows, and energy links keep humming, it buys political time for any embattled leadership. Material continuity often matters more than loud condemnations because it preserves strategic optionality.
But despite that, and despite the fact that ISIS and Al-Qaeda have never targeted Israel, they've targeted Russia, they've targeted Iran, they've targeted Syria, they've targeted Iraq, but they never target Israel. And rarely in the West have they targeted anyone else but any of these people. But those were most probably rogue elements. But anyway, but they never targeted Israel. Or if they were not rogue elements, they never targeted Israel. But in any case, the Israeli regime has done itself no favors, but because it has shown itself to be rogue, but it has also shown that Turkey and Jolani they are not going to be treated any differently. But I don't believe that under Erdogan, Turkey has any incentive to get into any direct conflict with the Israeli regime.
Ankara has consistently balanced rhetoric with hedging. Domestic political narratives can sound confrontational, yet the underlying calculus, NATO position, economic recovery needs, energy corridors, steers policy back to pragmatism over escalation.
Because the priority of Turkey under Erdogan, it has never been Palestine. It has never been the Palestinian issue. For Turkey, for Erdogan is to expand, to become more Ottoman-like. And that is why he and Netanyahu have had similar interests, and that is to weaken the resistance. So destroying Syria, weakening Hezbollah, that is all good for Erdogan. Weakening Yemen, that's all good for... In Yemen, Erdogan has been supporting forces that are opposed to Ansarullah and the Yemeni government. The only place where Erdogan has had a supportive role is with Hamas. But He's never provided them with ammunition or to help them build the military infrastructure that they have.
Symbolic political hospitality, offices, scholarships cost less and carries lower external risk than transferring capabilities. It lets a government project solidarity to domestic and regional audiences without triggering the thresholds that invite sanctions or reprisals.
As we speak, Iran is continuing to support Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. The person who was in charge was one of the people who was murdered by the Israelis, General Izzati. But he's, of course, been replaced by someone else who's doing. But the point is that Turkey, what it has been doing under Erdogan is that it gives Palestinian scholarships. It gives, space for Hamas to have offices there. But it doesn't do anything against Israel. And I have no doubt, in the case of Qatar, for example, if the Americans told Qatar to shut down Al Jazeera, they'll shut it down.
That illustrates dependency leverage. Hosting critical foreign infrastructure inevitably narrows strategic autonomy. When a state's core security partner signals a preference, media latitude tends to contract quickly.
I mean, Qatar is where CENTCOM is based, and the base is funded by Qatar. So I don't see a scenario where the Israelis, the Erdogan is going to come into direct conflict with the Israeli regime. There are differences of interest, but there has always been a lot of mutual interests. And, at the end of the day, if anyone really says, no, this is not the case, they have to answer, why is it that we've had direct flights during this Holocaust between Istanbul and Tel Aviv. We've had the flow of oil continue. We've had trade. It's clear as day that, and of course, both of them were a part of this timber sycamore project that evolved into something very huge. It's clear as day that the Turkish government under Erdogan is very much in the NATO camp.
Despite periodic tensions, procurement disputes, rhetoric over regional operations, Turkey's institutional, intelligence, and defense interoperability still anchor it westward. Structural commitments outlast episodic diplomatic flare-ups.
And he is not going to do anything that is going to create a real wedge between the United States and Turkey, as he has never done so in the past. Whenever he's made some small moves, the United States has punished him, and he pulled back. But his interests, the interests of Netanyahu and Erdogan, are largely in parallel with each other. And so there are certain conflict notes. But there's no doubt that if push comes to shove in those areas, the West is going to be behind Israel, not Turkey. And Erdogan is not going to stand up to Israel in those areas. So I think that he's going to continue to be very cautious, and he's going to preserve his ties with Netanyahu.
We're left with a picture of calculated restraint, rhetorical distance paired with preserved strategic links. The takeaway is that durable regional influence often comes less from headline gestures and more from maintaining the corridors, energy, trade, intelligence that others quietly rely on. Unless those structural incentives change, expect continuity cloaked in episodic criticism rather than a clean strategic break.
A number of things have happened over the last couple of days, which I find interesting in Iran and in Lebanon. And I want to sort of respond to you first by going through these two. In Iran, there has always been this camp that says that, if we just did a deal with Americans, and look at Syria. That's what they've been saying for months. Look at Syria. Now that they've struck a deal, now that they've overthrown, it's Al-Qaeda and ISIS, it's true, horrible people. And the worst of the worst, very similar to Zionists themselves. If they could, get their hands on us, they'd cut off our heads. But they did a deal with the West, and the sanctions have been removed. So maybe if we did a deal with the West, the sanctions would be removed. That has been a narrative that has been going on since the fall of the previous Syrian government. People looked at, their TV, and these people have saw that doing a deal is not enough. They'll still come after you. You can tell, Jolani has been, shaving his beard, wearing ties, uh, you know, dealing with the devil, going to, place after place and telling the Israelis, we're friends and our enemy, we have, our enemies are the same enemies, and they'll still bomb him. They'll still bomb his people. They'll still bomb the people who they've been funding and supporting. You can't do a deal with the Israeli regime. This has reinforced the position of Ayatollah Khamenei and all those who've been saying that the United States, the Israeli regime, the collective West, you cannot deal with them.
When a constituency interprets selective strikes as proof that negotiation yields little insulation, hardline narratives gain credibility. Perception of futility is a powerful recruitment tool for more entrenched postures.
In Lebanon, it has strengthened Hezbollah because people are now saying, more people, many of the people who were saying, and this I know because I've been speaking to people in Lebanon during the last couple of days, many people who have been saying that Hezbollah has to give up its weapons are now saying we need these weapons. Because this, you have Jolani slaughtering the Druze and the Israelis bombing Damascus unprovoked. So if if the resistance is disarmed in Lebanon, nothing is there to protect.
Security vacuums rarely stay neutral. Disarming one actor without parallel enforcement mechanisms often invites more radical entrance rather than stability, the lesson many communities internalize.
Us from the Salafi Takfiris or the Zionists, the genocidal Zionists. And so that has strengthened the resistance in Lebanon among the Druze, among moderate Sunnis. Because remember, Salafists and Wahhabism, as I said earlier, they are new on the scene. They only came in since it really began in Afghanistan, where the Americans started using, and they used Saudi Arabia and the Emirates back then to fund the extremists to fight the Soviet Union, but also to contain the revolution in Iran. Revolution in Iran was anti-imperialist, calling for the Americans to leave the region, anti-colonialists. And so they started funding these Takfiri groups to create hatred for Shia. So it was like dual purpose. But the first books that were published, Takfiri books that were being taught at school or in madrasas for children, in Afghan children and children in parts of Pakistan, were published in the United States.
External sponsorship of ideological material decades ago still pays geopolitical dividends. An example of how short-term proxy logic can sow long-term fragmentation that outlives its original purpose.
Again, the Israelis are trying to do their best to turn the Druze, have them turn to the Israeli regime. And this is very dangerous. Syria, the Balkanization of Syria is exactly what the Israeli regime wants. And that is why, under no circumstances, should it be Balkanized. I mean, that's one reason. The other reason is Syria is Syria. People should live together. But I think that this is not going to go well for the Israeli regime. I've argued this from the beginning, as you know, that this 21 months has been one catastrophe for Israel after another. They have destroyed so much of our region. They've destroyed country after country. They've carried out a Holocaust. They're slaughtering people in Iran and Syria and Lebanon and elsewhere. But I think that this is all catastrophic for the Israeli regime. And in fact, I think is because of the stupidity of the Israelis. And here some may disagree, but I think if Israel had not done what it has done over the past 21 months, this whole Epstein issue that's now becoming big in the United States would not have become like this. the issue of Mossad. I mean, it would have been an issue, but not like this. When so many people in the United States are turning against Israel and seeing what they're just bombing Damascus unprovoked and carrying out this genocide.
International opinion often shifts not from abstract legal arguments, but from cumulative visuals and timing. High-profile strikes juxtaposed with domestic scandals can erode formerly steadfast external support.
And at the same time, this piece of garbage, Epstein and his friends and allies are cooperating with this regime and carrying out such great corruption in the United States and capturing the political order through the donors and through others who were involved with Epstein and many of the other Epsteins. I have no doubt that there are many other Epsteins out there who are busy doing their work. I mean, the girls that were given out to Epstein were given out to other people too, and I'm sure it's continued. But in any case, I think that what Netanyahu is doing, him and his coalition, is that they're further making the Israeli regime hated. And I think they are legitimizing, or should I say, they're reinforcing the resistance. And that they're telling the world that the resistance was right. You have to bear arms against the Israeli regime. You can never trust it. They'll never let you live, no matter how much you help them in killing their enemies or undermining the resistance. They will still not treat you as human beings.
Once a population internalizes that concessions don't yield status or security, escalation ladders shorten. Rebuilding trust later requires disproportionate diplomatic capital.
And so ultimately what I think is that what will happen in Syria is that people will say, well, under Hezbollah was a lot, Iran, Hezbollah, they were right. The resistance was right. What happened to Syria during the last 15 years has only made things worse for us. And we're not going to be protected because the Israelis will never treat us as equals. So I think that this is not going to work well for Israel at all. I'm not saying that Jolani is going to be undermined tomorrow. I'm not saying that these Takfiri monsters, especially those from Central Asia and China and elsewhere, really awful, or like the worst of the worst among them. Thousands of people who are, the plan is to keep them as tools for NATO later on when they want to undermine Asia and Asian growth. But I think it's not going to end well this is not good news for them. And so while the Israeli regime and I think one reason why Netanyahu may be doing this now is that there is a possibility for a ceasefire in Gaza. And this may help him to be strong. And you do know that his trial was delayed again. Every time the trial comes up, there's some sort of war that's carried out. So I think that maybe this could help him have the ceasefire and preserve his coalition at the same time. But I don't think it's the end of Netanyahu aggression.
After all these layers, regional hedging, proxy dynamics, shifting public sentiment, the core pattern stands. Tactical strikes can buy time, but they also accumulate reputational liabilities and harden adversary cohesion. Without a credible political framework, each new action narrows off-ramps and elevates long-term strategic risk over short-term gain. The strategic ledger is trending negative even if the operational tempo appears sustained.